Today we're talking about something I wanted to talk about for a very long time now, and that is the rise of Fenrir in the meta, specifically as a support secondary, also as a solo laner. The reason I didn't make this video earlier is that I wanted to have an opinion from a pro, from a support specifically on this, to have some more insight than just the more basic things that I could easily find out myself. And that has happened now, and Emilzy has given me a lot of insight on this. Emilzy will not be present talking in this video, I just have a ton of information from him, so thanks to him in advance. Go check him out if you haven't yet. He is a great support player that is also making a lot of great content on YouTube for more information. And with that, let's begin with why Fenrir went where he went. So when I last mentioned Fenrir in any context, it was basically in the context of him being a jungler, and as a jungler he was not very good. He was just out of the meta for various reasons, especially his early clear, his early aggression not being as strong anymore as it used to be at some point when there were less guards, him not exactly having the best transition into mid game, being easily interrupted in many ways, and also not being a safe late game in every situation. So as such, we kind of valued him very low when we were talking about him, and that kind of rapidly changed around Worlds when the pros came up with some new strategies and Fenrir was suddenly picked in support and in solo lane. The first and most obvious factor that led to this was the introduction of Lono's mask. Eventually, the pros picked up on the fact that Fenrir is good as a support and he is better with Lono's mask because that way he is more survivable, and as an assassin he can build this item. So that's the core point that most people can kind of just figure out from looking at his builds basically. But there's a lot around that. If you look at the more basic side of things, he has a lot of early aggression, and when he gets a pick on someone, it's a relatively free kill. These things aren't necessarily things that are completely new for Fenrir and just came up with this patch or something. So a key factor to really make Fenrir this popular is changes to the meta, or rather him changing the meta. This specifically refers to the meta on the pro level of play, the highest level of play. This is information all from Emilzy, because that's where the meta is typically shaped and then kind of trickles down to ranked and sometimes even to casuals, depending on how complex or how efficient it is. And the meta, even on the competitive level of play, used to be that the duo lane was a rather passive lane. The duo would typically start in lane and clear the wave and then go to their own purple. That was a very passive strategy that was still very rewarding and allowed a lot of more passive supports to be played as well. The enemy team had strategies they could use against that. They could try to invade the purple or even go to the enemy's red buff, but those strategies were typically too unrewarding to be used over just going for your own purple. And invade was rather easy to be held off in most situations with those guards that were played at the time, and if the enemy was going to red, you would just follow up as a support and the ADC would soak up the solo XP in the duo lane. Also, you'd run the risk of being late for a minion wave or even miss out on a minion wave to some degree, and as such, that playstyle was often not preferred over just more passive play and going for your own purple, which was very rarely punished. Then people tried to actively look to counter those strategies. The new playstyle to go more aggressive included not only playing full push and pressure, but also even try to go into the enemy purple before they could finish clearing, or clear at their tower line, with some guards obviously that were able to do that, and that extra pressure had to be countered again. We saw solo laners actually starting in duo lane as well to avoid this whole pressure situation and then teleport to lane as well. But that wasn't necessarily easy, as that could also be countered in solo again by the solo laner then taking the enemy's blue buff and then they would fall behind as well. So that strategy was depending on the matchup really. Some guards with like really strong early games, for example Sylvanas, could even go straight to the enemy purple buff and try to clear that. That kind of expanded to more aggressive support picks that you normally wouldn't see, like for example Achilles as well. With the right high pressure ADC that could clear on its own, the support could also go to the enemy purple when they were trying to clear it and try to just delay it and if you have enough clear potential or secure potential with your support, you could just try to make it so that the enemy can't really clear their purple. And if they got their purple, they would just lose the wave in return, lose the XP from that, which was not really rewarding either. So the situation focused more and more on high aggression. This was emphasized even more when then the double pot starts for support started, so you could heal up more at the same time. And they would run horrific at the same time, so you would really just try to pressure into their purple as much as possible, just prevent them from clearing that easily in any way possible. Again, the solo could also try to share the purple, but then the enemy solo would most definitely take their blue buff or get another lead in another way. So what was the result of that? We need even more pressure in duo lane to be able to secure those buffs and to aggress on the enemy buffs and just be aggressive in lane and in the buff camp area. The strongest level 1 guards got picked up, for example Amaterasu, who also got a nerf before Worlds in order to not make her too dominant in that regard, Sylvanas, Achilles, all that kind of stuff. And eventually it went on to the assassins. And that brings us to Fenrir and also Naja. These guys have very, very high kill potential, both in lane and on buffs. Naja, aside of that, also has very high clear potential, but that is another story. And you will have a really hard time securing anything with them around on the very early levels. You can follow the enemies to purple when they try to invade, and you can really aggress on them there, and your risk at the same time is relatively low. Fenrir would be picked with a high clear, high pressure combo. So for example, you could pick someone like Chiron to even cleanse Horrific, which was the meta relic at the time for most. And you have someone like Ullr for high pressure. You could also pick someone like Ram with a super high clear, Medusa for a bit of both, I guess, Izanami and Anhur for his high pressure. Jing Wei was also picked up, a bit of a different story. It was more accepting that you will not win lane because the support will fall behind, but she just kinda survives any high pressure lane by going back constantly. Now Fenrir is a god that is very good from ahead, and so are any assassin supports really. So when you play them, you want to play aggressive and you want to get ahead as early as possible, and that's very, very easy compared to many other gods. It's not always going to happen, but that's the goal at least. Your goal is to try and basically mess with the enemy support as much as possible, out-level them, and then abuse that lead and pick them up and bully them as much as possible with your ultimate, as most guardians don't have a lasting CC immunity, if any CC immunity at all. And this lead can snowball incredibly easy. Like for example, if you get so ahead that you bully the support out to the point where he's level 3 when you're level 5 as Fenrir, which is possible, then you can go out of lane as Fenrir and invade the enemy red, and there's not much that can be done about that unless you get your whole team to rotate there. Through being able to get ahead so much, you also have a very easy time interrupting the enemy engage, because typically it's the support that will engage first, and if you pick him up with Fenrir and have your team blow him up because he's a few levels under-leveled, that will give your team a very easy time in a team fight. Additionally, a lot of focus is on the red buff in the current meta, and the high aggression invades is something that Fenrir can do very easily and can get ahead that way as well, even if the kills in lane don't happen that much. Now obviously Fenrir and Naja had their issues with late game, where they were considered rather bad, but with Lonos being included in the build, that is kind of solved. They do have a lot more late game viability. Still not necessarily the best late game supports, but the pick that they can make can often be enough. Another issue that arises for the enemy team is also objective play. If the support gets too ahead, then you have to invest too much into killing them when near an objective. So you may have to burn the ultimates that you wanted to use to secure, and even if you kill the enemy support, then the enemy team will probably be easily able to at least keep you from the objective at that point, if not outright kill you as well. So to prevent this to some degree, there would often be more aggressive picks in support on both sides, and often not necessarily traditional support picks as well, which also led to more guardians going into solo lane, as there is less pressure on solo now, with jungle mainly being there to contest the buffs around duo lane too, and you want to have that guardian somewhere in many situations, which is obviously double beneficial in the context of Guardian's Blessing being very good in solo at the moment. And that, in summary, is how Fenrir's support ended up being as good as it is now. Now, if you want to play him, here are some tips for that. Your main goal is to feed off the enemy support. Ult them when you have a lead as much as possible, just to further that lead whenever you can. Make sure you have your passive fully stacked when you use your 1 and you also land it, because otherwise you won't get the lowered cooldown. And that is impactful because that means you will have double the cooldown on the ability. If you have a hard time hitting the 1, wait until the enemy is basic attacking. That way they will be slowed down through the strafe penalty and it will be much easier for you to land your 1. Know when to ult and pick someone up or not. Sometimes it's good enough to jump on a target and bait their beats, then ult and switch targets and grab someone completely different who wasn't expecting it, or to try and bait multiple beats in a single ult. Also, keep in mind that as long as they don't have Magi's Blessing, you can still pick them up after their beats. The duration of Fenrir's ult is incredibly long and most other ultimates, with a few exceptions like Daji, are not able to counter it reliably. Fenrir overall is, at least according to Emilzy, not a hard god to play. You really don't have to focus that much on the mechanics and rather on the targets and what's going on around you. Your 3 isn't always necessarily your highest damaging tool, and in some situations it can be very easily interrupted. It's often not as important as the support anyways. So sometimes it can be worth using the 3 just to dodge high damaging abilities and not hold on to it. Also, this is more of a thought project so far, I would say, but consider if it's worth for you to max the 3 at all. Are you jungling that much that it's worth for you to max the 3 just for that? Otherwise, it can be worth putting points into the 2 just to maximize the damage of your 1 if you engage very frequently. In either case, what you probably don't want to max is the ult, as there isn't really much benefit in it. Now let's talk a little bit about counters as well. The first one is the most obvious one, the one that was used the most as well, and that is Artio. Artio, with her constant cripple, obviously is a great choice against Fenrir, and she typically does have the upper hand in lane. Unfortunately, Artio isn't exactly the best late game support herself, so while you're getting Fenrir out of the way, you're still making a sacrifice. Often, the better way to counter Fenrir is actually by countering the guards that are basically the ones following up on the Fenrir ult. Say, for example, if the enemy team has a Ra on a Pwash who will ult off the Fenrir ult or use a lot of abilities of the Fenrir ult, then you want to try and counter those instead, so they can't do their job properly. Those will often be easier to kill than Fenrir himself. A guard that, for example, can do that even though he doesn't necessarily have the best laning phase, which he kinda compensates for with his passive, is Fafnir. Fafnir can jump into the enemy backline and he's very hard to kill there even when he gets picked up himself. He has that ult to make him more survivable, so he can zone himself too. And other guards that are able to survive in the backline and just jump in, cause chaos, or somehow survive the ult generally work pretty well. There is obviously also Ares, who is a big talking point in this regard. We didn't see his full potential at Worlds, and a certain player will probably scream and throw his baguette at the screen for what I'm about to say, but what we will have to say with Ares is that he has a bit of a problem with falling behind. The moment Ares falls behind, he gets very easy to pick out, so you constantly want to stay ahead, and Fenrir is trying to get ahead himself and usually has an easier time doing so and is a bit safer in that regard as well, especially when it comes to invading buffs and things like that. You also have to keep in mind that Fenrir ult lasts longer than Ares ult, so Fenrir will pick up Ares if he is close at the beginning of his ultimate. So while Ares with his chains countering the 1 and 3 seems very good, he does not do it as easily as Artio does and has a few more risks in regards to his own safety. So this is only possible really when you're really good with Ares. Emilzy also claimed that you can jump the chains if you're quick enough. However, from my experience, unless you're doing a side jump with a 3, I don't feel like that's something you will be able to reliably pull off. Maybe I don't have the elite gamer skills you need for that, but I tested around in jungle practice a fair bit, and even knowing that the chains would come, the chance to actually avoid them, especially with the 1, were incredibly low. So what you would want to do in most situations is jump Ares first as Fenrir. So that's what you probably have to expect. The point is that Fenrir doesn't even need his 3 all that much when being played as a support. So at the end of the day, it might not help you anyways, or Fenrir might jump you and then ult you and your chains won't even get their proper use. Gap's cleanse can obviously also be very helpful, but he is going to be falling behind a lot if you pick him in dual lane, so he's maybe a bit more of a solo lane choice to counter out Fenrir. Last but not least, you can also obviously just rival Fenrir in pressure and pick someone like Naja, though he struggles from the same safety issues as Ares does. When it comes to building Fenrir, you just want to go with your typical support items. You want your sovereignty, you want your only the Scarp, and if you want to go super aggressive, then you can throw in something like Void Shield or Ancile very occasionally. Most of the time you will just go into Lono's Mask and more defensive items. That concludes the overview for Fenrir as a support, and obviously in solo most of the things apply in a similar way, aside of the fact that you obviously have to counter build a little more in the early stages of the game. With that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful and finally shed some light on this whole topic. I know I've been holding this off for a long time, sorry about that. Also, if you wanted some more info on how to play Fenrir, Teets has a guide on him that I will link right here and at the end screen, so you can check that out if you want to learn more about playing Fenrir yourself. And also, I'd like to give a quick shout out to my current channel members, sponsors, Kenny Olsen, R. Rowers, The Edgy Potatoes Edgy, and Richard Thompson. With that, thank you guys very much for watching, I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, smash that subscribe button, and see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.